Hey everyone, and welcome to the show. I'm James, that's Katie, and of course, that makes this episode 23 of Circles and Squares. I don't know about you, Kate, but I've had a pretty long day. It's just after 8 p.m. here now, and I'm looking forward to just chatting games with you and then getting a damn good sleep. I need it. How are you?
I'm doing good. I had the kind of the opposite today. We're recording this on Thursday, which is sort of my day off. So I had a nice, relaxing. I got up a little late, made a coffee, sat and was cozy.
I'm
Um,
envious.
but but I was also extremely productive. To follow up on our previous Hades episode, I sort of got this in my mind that I'm gonna like 100% the game, and we'll see if that actually ends up happening or
That's a
not.
big undertaking. I was going to say there's a shitload of stuff to
Well,
unlock.
I have an ambition, but you know what? I'm actually really far. Like I think I'm relatively close. Like I got an achievement today and it was like 5.6% of players have done this. And like I've kind of like completed some story stuff.
Oh, and you know
So
what I'm thinking is because I guess you're playing on PC, right? Because on Switch there's no achievements or
mhm.
anything. I'd have to go like manually through each checklist and I guess it's not too
Oh,
tough,
okay.
but there's no achievements, right?
Yeah, that is one of the downsides of playing on Switch, I guess. Because I'm not like a trophy hunter, but it's nice when something pops up, and there's been a few trophies that I've specifically, like, worked towards getting because they've been something fun or unusual gameplay-wise that I might not have done, if it wasn't for the trophy. But anyway, I won't spoil it because I'm sure there's a lot of people who are still playing the game right now and haven't made it as far. But I beat today the probably I guess what I'm assuming is how you make the final boss as hard as you can,
Damn,
in
okay.
a sense that, like, it's I guess a slight, foreshadowing for later in the episode, but it gives you the option once you get far enough to make, like, difficulty choices, and one of the choices is actually you can make each boss a harder version of themselves.
Oh wow, like you like in a way you can't access in the regular game then.
Yeah, so it, like, becomes an option you can kind of, like, toggle, and you can do it individually for each boss, and so, obviously, the last one you can do is you can make Hades tougher, and he's, like, already tough enough on his own, like, he's
Yeah, I
no
was gonna
chump.
say it's a tough challenge sometimes depending like what weapon you have and everything. So I
Yeah,
mean
he's
yeah.
he's no chump, but I beat it took me a couple tries, but I beat him on the harder setting today, and oh my god, it was so intense, like, I didn't realize when I was in the fight, but afterwards, I was, like, standing up, and I realized, like, the adrenaline was wearing off, my heart was, like, pumping, the music gets so intense, it was awesome, so I'm riding that high probably for the next, like, I don't know, hopefully not too long, I'd also like to go to bed tonight, but we'll see.
Might be the Hades high all night, you never know.
Maybe 85 for the next week, we'll see.
Okay, well, that reminds me of some of the me when I'm fighting some of the Bloodborne bosses as well. Like I would just be sitting on the couch, fighting. I remember this against who's the guy at the top of the castle at Canehurst? Marta Ligarius.
Oh, Ligarius,
That
yep.
guy, I don't know, he had my number for a while, and I just got to this point where I would be getting closer and closer and like inching off the couch. And by the time I actually got to the run where I beat him, I remember I was like, yeah, standing in the middle of the living room, like not even really consciously deciding I was gonna do that. It's where I
Yes.
ended up.
I
It
know,
happens.
I was I was standing at my desk when I fought him because I converted my desk into a bit of a standing desk to not because I'm here
Yeah.
all day, and, like, was, like, so overwhelmed and the adrenaline was there, my heart was pumping, and it was so intense, and I, like, did a couple laps, just, like, walked around my chair and, like, around my living room, and, like, it would seem so silly if someone was here to watch, but, like, the adrenaline rush is real in some of these
It
fights, like,
is.
the music and, like, you're
It
so
is.
focused and, like, oh, like, he gets down to the end and you're like, "Come on, like, I wanna beat it so badly."
Well, no one was in the living room with you, but they're sure hearing it now on the show. So you've been outed as the
That's right.
extreme stressed out person who are playing boss fights, I guess. But maybe we'll talk some more about some difficult boss fights later on because we have a pretty busy show here today, Kate. Maybe we'll get into it. Just before we do, though, I want to let everyone know we're going to be talking obviously about the PlayStation Plus games for February as part of our news section, and we would love it if you've played any of the games. Again, PS Plus this month, just to get into it a bit early, I guess. Destruction All Stars, Concrete Genie, Control. We'll talk more about them later, but they're all fairly sizable PlayStation. Two of them are exclusive to PlayStation. The other one, Control, obviously is just a big game. So if you have any thoughts on these leading up to the next episode, feel free to send us a message just with your thoughts on the game or a question you have. about what we're going to be playing with any of those three games to circlesandsquarespod@gmail.com. We would love to read them out, answer them on the show at the end. We do a listener mail every episode, so thank you very much for anyone that writes in. But today, Kate, we're going to be talking obviously about the games we've been playing the last couple of weeks. We'll then be taking a quick break and getting into the news section for the second part of the show, which does include the PS Plus news as well as a couple other stories. And then finally, to end out the show, instead of doing a listener mail at the end and as a shorter thing and then doing another topic before, we're actually taking another listener mail question we got and expanding it into the full third segment, and we're going to have a discussion on difficulty in video games. So stick around for that at the end. But Kate, before we get that far in the show, let's talk about what we've been playing, and both of us, since we last recorded, have checked out the Resident Evil Village demo.
Yeah, I think it's called Resident Evil Village Maiden. I think it got its own kind of exclusive title. I remember it did because I had trouble finding it in the eShop. I'm like, where's the Resident Evil? This is just buy the game, but it's called Maiden. So
yeah, it's a bit confusing, and it was only on that. Yeah, we mentioned it last time too, but the demo was exclusive for PS5, which is an interesting choice because the game, like we were just talking about off mic when we were just before we recorded, the game is multi-platform. So interesting, maybe marketing decision, I guess, for PlayStation to get the demo. But yeah, what did you think of it?
Overall, I liked it. My first impression was positive. I mean, it really just felt like a Resident Evil game. Like I played Biohazard.
It's a little while ago, right? Later last year, I think.
Yeah, it was not too long ago, and this game really felt very similar to that. I mean, obviously it's got a different setting and the aesthetics a bit different, but it felt very similar. I think it's made in the same engine, like it looks very similar to Biohazard. But overall, I had a positive impression. I found the demo was surprisingly short.
Yeah, it was,
which is a shame, and also strange, especially too because it was an exclusive. It's like Sony paid a lot, and it was like, like you could beat the demo in 20 minutes if you don't get too stuck.
Yeah, I found the same thing. I think that some of the length on what they may probably anticipate is like people are going to go through the demo pretty slowly just because of the fear factor of it, right? You're in some pretty dark hallways, and it's kind of like a prison that you appear in at the start of the thing, and not to give too much away for those that want to check it out, but yeah, you're kind of going through some pretty scary environments. So I know, like, for me, it took me probably about that 15-20 minute range to get through it, although like if I was to go into the demo again, you could beat it in literally probably 2 minutes if you just kind of mainlined it, but that's not the point, right?
Yeah, exactly. You want to look around and look for notes or secrets or things, and it was good. I found the first half of it a lot scarier than the second half. The setting changes partway through, and I think the first half is just a lot scarier of a setting, although the monsters, I guess, and the enemies seem seem interesting.
Why don't we just spoil it here? It's only a demo. I feel like it's pretty short. People can go play it if they want. Like that tall lady is what everyone's been talking about. Whatever her name is. People love this chick, and she honestly does seem like a pretty cool character.
She does, but you know what my favorite thing about her is Capcom has officially come out and said, after people got like sort of memeing about how tall she was, Capcom has officially come out and confirmed that she is 9'6".
She's 9'6".
He's 9'6", and like that's such a weird and specific detail to note, but like I love it.
the specification of that exact thing.
Yeah,
wow.
Like,
I believe it though, because she's
really tall.
Yeah, because like there's one point in the demo which you get to, and where she's it's kind of scripted, unavoidable, where she grabs you and does this little bit of, it's like an attack, I guess, or bites you or whatever she does, and you can see that she kind of has like this view of you from above almost as she's coming down to grab you, and it's like you can tell she must be pretty tall.
Yeah. I think overall, I mean, I was intending to buy and play it anyway. This hasn't really changed my mind. Like, I think if you don't own a PlayStation 5 yet, I don't think you're really like missing out by not having gotten this demo. But it was fun to just sit down and sort of like get excited about it. So, the biggest thing to me though is not so much the demo, but just the release date. I wasn't expecting it so early, but they confirmed that it's going to be out on May 7th, which is not very far away.
Yeah, it's pretty encouraging. I like the fact that it's a quick turnaround time, because this demo really could bring in, people who maybe saw the Resident Evil 2 remake that was really popular last year, or maybe they did check out Biohazard, because I think that's on the PS Plus collection, right? And so
It is. Yeah, it is.
yeah, so maybe the thinking is like, well, people have played these games recently. Let's put the demo out, and then hey, if you like that, the game's coming out just a couple months later on. So I think it's a good kind of turnaround schedule, as long as things have been getting delayed, like we've been talking about. So as long as it doesn't get pushed or sent back for any kind of reason, I think it's going to do pretty well in May.
Well, fingers crossed. I mean, the last thing we want is more delayed games, but I guess that's better than buggy messes.
Hey, we'll see.
But
But either way, I guess you'll be playing it and talking about it on the show at that time. So we'll look forward to that. Maybe I'll move along, Kate, and I'll tell you about a game that I played and beat in one day, because it's always nice. I don't know how often you do this, but sometimes I like to sit down and kind of just have a short experience, 1 or 2 hour game, and play it in like one sitting. I think that's
Mhm.
a really cool experience, and it's a nice way to get in and out of something quick. Maybe if you're, especially like I'm playing Persona 5 The Royal still, right? I'm 115 hours or whatever it is in, and I'm like, I need to break this up with something for my afternoon. And
Yeah, it's
so,
nice. Have a little
yeah,
have a little bite-sized game.
exactly. It literally bite sized because I played Donut County, um, which
Delicious.
ironically has almost nothing to do with donuts. Um,
What? It's not a cooking sim?
you know what? Surprisingly not. It's a puzzle game with a really cute kind of cartoony animal aesthetic, and it's from Annapurna Interactive. I don't know if you're too familiar, but they're the studio, or I guess they're a publisher that put out What Remains of Edith Finch and Florence. And a couple
Oh,
other
okay.
kind of artsy games that I actually quite liked, both of those. So I was excited to check this out. It's actually from the developers Ben Esposito. He was one of the programmers, I believe, on Edith Finch. So kind of
Oh,
cool to
okay.
see him
That's a
work his way up.
a
And
nice accolade for sure.
yeah, definitely. So the game basically is it's a puzzle game focused on this donut delivery service where the donuts well, let me back up. The story is about, it's in this little town, like everyone's an animal, kind of cutesy, kind of like an Overcooked style art style. And
Mhm.
the alleged plot is that some raccoons have showed up, and raccoons are really into garbage, and so they've started this donut delivery service. But instead of delivering donuts, the quote unquote donuts are holes in the ground, which slowly start to, you're trying to suck up the stuff that everyone has around their yard and get into this hole because the raccoons want to collect all the garbage because that's what they're interested in. So you start off, and every puzzle starts like in the front of someone's house, for example, and you'll be this little tiny hole in the ground moving around, kind of sucking up little stones off the ground and little blades of grass and maybe little small pieces of debris that are on the floor. And then the more you absorb, the larger the opening in the ground starts to get, and you can start to, all of a sudden you're like, oh, there's a newspaper on the ground, kind of suck that up. Then, oh, the lawn chair the guy was sitting on to read the newspaper is just will fit now, and you start to absorb more and more stuff, and by long you're kind of sucking in houses and giant mountains, and like basically a giant sinkhole is at your disposal, and you're just destroying everything around.
Wow, that sounds like it escalates quite a lot. But I
It
gotta say,
does.
if I ordered a donut, like say, it's like 1 a.m. I'm having a hard time. I need a donut really badly. Tim Hortons is on Skip the Dishes now. I order a donut. If a sinkhole shows up to my door instead of a donut, I am not gonna be pleased.
Yeah, well, the characters in this game, they actually get over it pretty well, because what happens is, obviously, at the end of every level, if you're sucking people's houses down and all their possessions, they're going to go with it. So the game kind of
Right.
takes place in this underground type of cavern where the inhabitants of this town are recounting the stories of like what happened to them, and invariably there's like one character that runs a restaurant, and they're like telling you
Does
about
he
how
actually does he actually sell donuts now? Or is it just go even deeper? Is there another single?
that maybe that's for the sequel. I don't know, but it's just cool to seeing every character's individual story of what happened, and how they basically their life has been ruined by this raccoon, and he actually ends up in the hole too. And there's a whole story about how they get out. It's cute and charming and takes place over a couple of hours time, so it's a nice little. It doesn't overstay its welcome because the game isn't overly complex. Like there's not really too much mechanical complexity going on. You're kind of just directing this
Mhm.
whole around, sinking everything down. There is some like light puzzle solving elements which are actually kind of creative, where for example you can come across a hose or like a pond in someone's yard, and if you put the sinkhole underneath that, it fills with water. So then you can, instead of when you pick up a box, instead of it just dropping into the hole, it will float in the water. So you need to use that for certain kinds of puzzles. And you can also shoot things out of the hole if you pick up certain items. So there's one where if you fill it with water, you go then past kind of a hydroelectric, one of those wooden wheels, that goes on like a
Mhm.
factory or something, and you shoot the water
Yeah.
through that and power another facility. So I mean, it's just kind of little stuff like that that's creative and cute, but it's not really anything that bends your mind too far, if you know what I mean. So
Mhm.
so it was just like a nice light experience. There's a lot of collectibles too. Like there's something called the Trashopedia, which is where you keep track of all the different
Mhm.
items you've absorbed over the game, and you can kind of go through and read about them and what they are. So there's some stuff there for like achievement hunters and collectible people as well. But in general, I think this game's even on your phone and whatnot too. So if you have some interest, I'm sure you could probably pick it up for $5 or $6, whatever it is. And I think it's worth your time if you're looking for something like that. But I mean, don't go in expecting it's going to last you super long. That's
Yeah.
my only criticism basically.
Yeah,
But
that's fair,
I
but you
liked
know what?
it.
Sometimes you just want something, like, relaxing and just, like, quiet to play for a little bit, and, like, I've heard of this game, and I've heard really good things about it, actually, like, I like I'm sure maybe it gets overhyped a little bit, but I've heard the story is quite nice, and the writing's actually pretty good, especially because 'cause you're not really expecting it, like, it seems like it could have just been a puzzle game, like, just a light, simple puzzle game. They didn't have to really, like, justify the world or, like, go into tons of detail, but people really appreciate that they did, so
Yeah,
I've
well, I
actually heard,
definitely
like,
did.
nothing yeah, I've heard, like, nothing but good things about this little game, and it's been one that's sort of like, like a Steam sale, I might pick it up, or, like, might be a good Switch game if I start commuting again or something.
Yeah, well, it's great. It would be great on Switch, like anything handheld for sure. I played it on PC just because it was on Game Pass for free, so I checked it out there. But I mean, anywhere you can get it would be great. I would imagine it would actually be pretty good with touch controls if you had it on Switch, even. So maybe something to look out for. But yeah, Donut County, check it out if you have an opportunity. If you have Game Pass, it's a great thing to do. Would
Mhm.
definitely recommend. So yeah, that's for me, Kate. Yeah, what about you?
Well, I've kinda done the opposite. I've sort of gone accidentally, with Resident Evil to have a horror theme, but the other day, I beat Outlast, which was that infamous horror game, the one with you're a reporter and you, like, record the whole game through that, like, camcorder.
Yeah, and that was on PS Plus at one point as well, right? I believe.
I'm not sure. I don't think I personally have it, but it might have been
Mm.
previously. I'm not 100% sure on that, but it's definitely like a well-known horror game, and I would say it's probably it's got potential to be the scariest game I think I've ever played, but it's not my favorite horror game. So it's kind of striking this balance where it seems like it's very heavily inspired by both Resident Evil, which like it's almost hard to come across a horror game now that isn't,
Yeah, it's so
and
quintessential,
also
right?
yeah, exactly. So this looks like it's about 50% that and 50% Amnesia: The Dark Descent, which was like
That's a scary ass game too.
yeah, that game is good. I would say that is probably my favorite horror game. I don't think I'm alone. That game kind of almost revolutionized how
Yeah,
modern
yeah.
horror games
And
work.
it's really kind of stood the test of time too, because that game is it's pretty old, Amnesia now. I think it's like the early mid 2000s or something, right? Not to get too
Yeah,
off
like
track.
I played that I was in high school when I played that game. Like it
Hmm.
was quite a while ago. And I think Amnesia still holds up as a better game, but I think like, Outlast benefits obviously by being a lot newer. The graphics are a lot better. They could do a bit more with the making the AI smarter. So it's kind of got those benefits, but it's definitely piggybacking off of a lot of what Amnesia did. So it kind of works in the same sense as Amnesia in terms of gameplay, where there's no combat. If you are detected by a monster and they have the desire to kill you, which spoiler, they absolutely will, then basically your only option is to just try to run away, create as much distance as you can. And once you've done that, you have the mechanic of hiding. So it's usually under beds, in lockers. And
Basically
sometimes
anywhere
that
so you don't
works.
get your head ripped off.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like, you can sometimes well, you can sometimes, like, try to hide around a corner or, like, go somewhere that it seems to be out of their sight line, and occasionally that will work for you. But there are also, like, designated hiding spots, like under beds and, in lockers and things where, like, you are 100% hidden, and they will not find you unless every now and again they'll like just by random happenstance just like check under one bed, and that is the scariest thing in the world when you're hiding under the
Oh
bed
my
beside
god.
it and you watch the monster check the bed and you're like the next bed over and you're like, oh shit, like don't check mine, don't
I
check
had that
mine.
I had that experience in Little Nightmares when I played that last year. Just the same kind of, it's definitely not as scary as something like Outlast, but the same kind of tension of like, oh god, I'm under this table, like just go look under that one. Leave me over here.
Yes, absolutely. and I think it's definitely that sense of helplessness that makes it so scary, and in comparison to something like Resident Evil, which I think is the other big the other game series that it reminded me of, but that's more in terms of story. Like,
Mhm.
it's set, like, kind of, in an insane asylum, and, like, these people sort of become monsters, and there's this big over the top, like, almost comical plot about, like, science experiments that have gone absolutely wrong, and, like, there's, like, monsters have been created, and it's just absolutely ridiculous, but in kind of like a Resident Evil sort of way. And I think, like, it's serviceable and, like, you find notes as you go along similar to Resident Evil, and you can read little, like, documents, like an email from one employee to another, or, like, something someone's, like, written down or documented about one of the characters. So that's where, like, the majority of the story gets told to, and every now and again you meet a character who will have some dialogue with you, because there's a couple that are, like, sane enough to do so.
Just a couple.
Yeah, honestly, just a couple. It is, yeah, you're not a friend to many characters in this game. But it's effective. I think, the other thing that makes it so scary and stand out for me, and I don't know if it's the first game to have done this, but it's the first one I played specifically where, you have, like, night vision is kind of a core mechanic, so
Like that
you hold
green
your recorder
classic?
up as you yeah, like the green classic night vision, like, you hold your recorder up as you walk around, and the premise of that is it's kinda cute. The premise is that you're, like, a reporter, and you've come to this place because there's all sorts of, like, bizarre rumors going around, so you've come to, like, investigate, and then you get trapped in the asylum, and then sort of your entire goal is, "Okay, I've gathered enough evidence in the first 5 minutes, things are real fucked up. I should leave."
Yeah, that's what a real person would do.
Exactly, so you are trying to escape, but, you're while you're here and you're locked in, you might as well record as much as you can. So you got your camcorder up, but it gets very dark in most of the areas, so you have to turn, like, night vision on to see in the dark, but then everything's, like, green and grainy, and it just adds to that sense of, like,
Mhm.
you're so powerless.
Yeah, and your field of view is probably a lot reduced compared to what it usually is.
Yeah, exactly, you can't see quite as clearly, and then the other tension is the only resource in the game are batteries, so you really don't wanna run out of those, so it lends to a lot of sequences where you're kind of like you turn it on for a couple seconds to look around, turn it off, and you, like, walk in the dark, and you turn it back on, and you're like, "Okay, I'm, like, scouting around a little bit more," and then there's this, like, constant, like, on and off pressure of if you should be using your resource or not. Um
Sounds stressful as hell.
it does. I think the game is very liberal with giving you batteries, especially if you explore. So I don't think there was ever a point where we were even close to running out when we played, but it definitely like it still adds the tension. And there's difficulty settings that you can play on, which I guess would most likely decrease the amount of batteries that you can find, or
Yeah.
how quickly you go through them. So but we just played on the regular because it was it's good enough in atmosphere that it's scary enough, I don't
Yeah,
think you
you
need
don't
the
need to be adding to that, that's for sure.
yeah, exactly, it is working as intended, it's fine.
Cool.
But yeah, overall I enjoyed it. I think the only downside to the game and my biggest complaint is that I think it is a little bit too long. The I'm not sure how long my playthrough was, but I looked it up and the average playtime is about 5.5 hours. Which doesn't sound like a very long time, but the thing is because you don't really have any gameplay options, it starts to get a little bit repetitive,
Mhm. Well, it's pretty
because you're
mechanically
stuck.
simple, right? If you get once you get past the horror and maybe get a bit more acclimatized to that kind of setting, all of a sudden you have very little you actually have to do.
Yeah, exactly, and, like, you go through, like, a few they vary the settings up a little bit. There's, like, kind of like a church sort of area, and there's an area where you get to do outside of the building, and then there's, like, a sewer section you go into, and so it does vary up the areas as much as it can when basically the whole game takes place in one massive building, um, but it's not they're not super distinct from each other, and when you're in those areas, you're pretty much being accosted by the same couple villains, so that isn't changing. But yeah, overall it was good. I think, there's just if it had been, like, an hour shorter and if it had, maybe a couple less times where it was like, "Oh, you get to a new area, but you have to turn the power on, like, find these 2 generators to turn on, and then you can continue." Like, it just sort of those, like, game mechanics kind of almost get in the way of exploring and trying to escape this scary place.
Yeah.
So
That's too
I
bad.
felt
That's too bad.
yeah, it's like they
Still a
almost
good
got
experience
forced
though, you
down.
know?
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. It's still a good experience, and I'd still definitely recommend it if I don't know how many people who are into horror games that haven't played this one because it's so big.
Yeah,
And,
that's
like,
fair.
it did so well when it came out, but yeah, I would definitely recommend it, but I would recommend even more so go play Amnesia.
Well, there you have it, folks. We will take a quick break and be back afterwards for some talk about the news, including the PS Plus games for February 2021 and the Mass Effect Legendary Edition. So please don't go anywhere. We'll see you in a couple minutes. All right, everyone, welcome back for the second and middle part of the show, where we will be talking about some news over the last couple of weeks from PlayStation. Starting with, of course, Kate, it is a new month. It is 2021. It is February, and that means it is time for PlayStation Plus selections. This month is an absolute winner as far as PS Plus games go. For those that haven't heard yet, of course, the news did come out a few days ago, but we have Destruction All-Stars coming from Lucid Games. Of course, that was actually supposed to be released earlier in the year, but it was changed to a PS Plus title a few months ago and is out this month. We also have Concrete Genie from Pixel Opus and Control from Remedy, which does have the Ultimate Edition included for the PlayStation 5 upgrade, so that's really exciting. Kate, I don't know where we even start with this. This is three pretty strong selections.
Yeah, this is, like, the best month that's happened in a while, aside from maybe the Hollow Knight month, that was really nice.
Mm-hmm,
But
mm-hmm.
this is like, yeah, Sony's been like, "Hey, happy Valentine's Day, like, we really love you."
We love you. Take these games. Yeah. So for
This
those
is
of you that
lovely, yeah.
yeah. For those of you that don't know, every month, Kate and I both pick one PS Plus game to talk about on the following episode, just to get a little review in for you guys. But I think with this month, we're gonna try something a little bit different, just because we do have such high profile games on the PS Plus lineup. So I think the plan will be that we're going to try and cover as best we can all three games between the both of us, including probably we'll both play Destruction All Stars. I plan to actually try to beat Concrete Genie as well before next episode, and then also check out some controls. So I don't know what your plan is, Kate, but we'll probably both have some experience with all the games, or maybe at least two of the three.
Yeah, Destruction All-Stars, I'm definitely gonna play. It looks like a fun kind of like, party game sort of experience. Concrete Genie, and I'm hoping it's alright. I always mess it up. I wanna call it Concrete Jungle for some reason, I don't know why.
That's like a weird. It is a game on PlayStation 3, like one of those indie games that came out near the start of the
Yeah,
console. But yeah, totally
yeah,
different.
I don't know if I don't know, I don't even think I'm getting it mixed up with that. I just for some reason, Concrete Genie, it doesn't stick in my head properly, but I wanna play that. I remember seeing it, I think, at E3 one year and thinking it just looked like it looked like the game equivalent of, like, watching a Pixar movie
Mm-hmm.
or,
Hey,
like, anything.
spoilers! I started playing it last couple nights, and
Ah,
it's really beautiful. I really like it so
yeah.
far.
Yeah, it looks just so wholesome and wonderful, and I kind of forgotten it exists, so I'm really excited to check that out. Control's a game that's been on my list for a very long time, and time permitting, I would love to get around to it, but I feel like I'm playing a lot of games right now, and I don't wanna, like,
Oh, you can't overdo it.
yeah, I don't overdo it. I don't like play the first couple hours and then like fall off of it. So like I don't know. I might save that one and play the other two, but like definitely I'm very excited about Control. Like that game has been on my playlist for a long time.
Yeah, no, same here, and I'm so excited to check it out with the PS5 upgrade, just because I know it does add in a lot of ray tracing and controller adaptive trigger stuff. So yeah, I'm really excited to jump into that. But in any case, we will have more talk about those three games next episode. And like I said at the top of the show, if you've played any of those and have any opinions or thoughts or questions for us, please send them in. Our email address is in the description of this podcast or wherever you're watching the show. But Kate, why don't we move along to our second news story, which is that we have a release date for the Mass Effect Legendary Edition. Everyone celebrate. This is the best news. I am so happy. Uh, of course, Mass Effect is coming out on May 14th, which is actually really close to Resident Evil now that I think about it. So we're probably going to have some pretty damn good episodes around that time of year.
Yeah, it's
Um,
actually just exactly a week after if everything goes to plan.
Yeah, so we have Mass Effect coming out. The release date's awesome, but the one piece of news that I'm getting to here, which is from IGN Rebecca Valentine, is saying that the game is not going to have a strictly PS5 or Xbox Series X version, which is disappointing news, even though it does kind of get the increased frame rate and loading times and whatnot from just upgrading the PS4 version naturally. But it is a bit of a bummer just because I mean, Mass Effect is one of the bigger franchises in gaming, or at least it was back when the games were kind of more current. And it would have been nice to have, you know, a true PS5 version, but I mean, I'll take whatever I can get. I would love to. I can't wait to go back and revisit the trilogy for myself.
Yeah, I know you're a pretty big Mass Effect person. You didn't even hate the last one, which is impressive
Oh,
for a Mass Effect fan.
you know, the last one isn't bad. It's just the original trilogy is so damn good, and when you're comparing it to that, it was gonna fall flat. I think it's, yeah, just wasn't what it needed to be, but it wasn't like terrible.
Yeah.
Just my take.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I'm you're definitely the Mass Effect expert. I played maybe the first half of game 1, and, while I really did enjoy driving the Mako around, I just didn't really stick with it.
You're the only person I've ever heard that enjoyed the Mako.
No, no, I'm joking. The Mako was fucking awful. It's trash.
Okay, good, good, good.
The
I was gonna
Mako was
say, like, what the hell? What are you talking about?
I'm a you know what? I will say it maybe beats well, I would say maybe it beats driving around the Borderlands cars, but you know what? That might even be a tough contest.
Oh, come on, it's not as bad as that.
Well, yeah, it's pretty bad, but
We'll
you
see.
know what? I like Mass Effect and I respect it a lot as a series. It just wasn't for me. I'm not into the space setting
Yeah. Well,
too
it's
too
good.
much.
It's good
So
because you're more of the medieval fantasy stuff than me, so it works out.
exactly.
Uh,
I'll play Resident Evil, you play Mass Effect, and we'll call it a deal.
it's covered. It's covered. The other piece of cool news that came out of this was that they confirmed Jennifer Hale. She plays female Shepard in the third game, but they've confirmed that she's coming back to do Fem Shep for all 3 games now. So that's awesome news. I know people really liked her performance. So
Oh, that's
um,
awesome. We had that one listener mail asking about which one we thought was better, and we both agreed that we thought, well, both Sheps were good voice actors. Fem Shep
mhm,
was the like
yeah.
superior way to play.
I'm feeling like I actually might go with the female Shepherd when I play through on the remaster, just because I want to see the differences, and also, you know, people just say she does such a good performance that I'd like to experience it, especially going all the way through and carrying, you know, the character across all 3 games. I think that'd be pretty cool. Anyway, let's move to our last news story for the day, Kate. This is just some more sales stats like we had last time, except this time we have the numbers for the PlayStation 5 console from last year, which, spoilers, no surprise, really, it's very similar figures to the PlayStation 4 launch, which is about 4.5 million units in 2020. So pretty strong numbers here. And I think the only real reason they didn't sell more was because of the stock issues. So it's hard to say, I guess, really how it would have done if everything was, you know, in higher supply, but strong numbers nonetheless.
Yeah, I was sort of surprised. I mean, just based on the fact that like it's so hard for people to get their hands on them, and like yet the sales numbers are still fantastic. So I think that's just a testament to like how big the console is, how many people want it, and then also like unfortunately just how many like I would like to know that number of how many people were actually people buying the console or like scalpers and bots online eating them up.
I know. I think I
um,
saw a statistic the other day that it's 1 in 10 PS5s was bought by a scalper. So
oh,
if
that's
that's true,
so
that's
high.
a large percentage.
That is really concerning because that is a huge number, especially when you consider, like, just how many have been sold so far, but, I guess in a positive light, it bodes really well to, you know, how well the console is gonna do in the fact that it's performing well already, and that also, like, there's still so many people waiting to get their hands on one. Um, and the other thing this article points out that I thought was interesting was that and I don't know if this is something we'd heard before, but they're actually selling, like the hardware is apparently selling, like,
At
being
a
sold
loss, right?
less than it costs to make. Yeah, it's being, like, sold at a loss, and they're, like, obviously intending to make up their money on, like, PS Plus subscriptions and, like, game sales and stuff like that, peripherals and controllers and things, so,
Yeah, I know a lot of
um
consoles kind of go for that strategy, and I think it kind of makes sense because I know we were talking a lot about like price point numbers before the PS5 came out, and they hadn't really talked about it for so long leading up to the launch, and I think it's just one of those things where even if you're selling it at a launch, you just or at a loss, sorry, you can't really price yourself out of the market in that way, because I know like with last generation that's kind of what Xbox did, and it set them so far behind because nobody thought it was worth spending an extra $100 just to get that console, you know. So even at a loss, I feel like this is really the only way they could really do it, and then like you said, try and make the extra cost up on subscriptions and games and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it makes sense, and like yeah, like you said, I think like the price that we played for our PlayStations by actually buying one, not through a scalper, was reasonable. It was kind of like what we were hoping and expecting for, and so it obviously is working out for them. So
Hmm. Hmm.
that's great. Hopefully, we can just get more PlayStations in the hands of people who actually want to play them.
Yeah, it's scary. It'll be scary to see how much, how many more end up being sold. To be honest, because like one other stat in this article is like PlayStation's revenue apparently increased 40% last year, and it's like, man, this is supposed to be a hard time for a lot of people, and yet there's like millions and millions of dollars changing hands over PlayStations, and that's only the PlayStation. There's still the Switch, was sold like, you know, even crazier numbers, and same with Xbox and selling a lot too. So it's just one of those things like, man, this industry is like really growing right now thanks to COVID, it seems.
Yeah,
And
no kidding. Like I'm definitely not like a business person, but like it would be interesting. I'm sure there's stats out there, but yeah, like this industry's kind of like it's almost like a good thing. Like people are stuck at home, like they have so much more time for hobbies, or maybe like are looking to get into new hobbies. So like it's a great time to be a gamer.
amen, amen. It's always a good time to be a gamer, though. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. It's not like something you put on like a T-shirt that you buy at like Old Navy.
Oh man, we got to get those t-shirts made. It's a good time to be a gamer.
It's a good time to be a gamer.
Oh
I
man.
love
Okay, I need a break, Kate. Let's take another short break, and then we'll come back. Maybe get into some discussion about video game difficulty. So please take a break, and we'll see you again in 1 second. Please don't go anywhere. All right, everybody, welcome back. We are here to close out the show for the third segment by talking about video game difficulty, thanks to a question we got written in for listener mail, which goes as follows. What are your opinions on the difficulty of video games? Do you believe all video games should have difficulty settings built into the options, or are some games better left the way the developers created them despite their lack of accessibility to lesser skilled gamers? It's a big question, Kate, and I know like difficulties kind of become a big topic kind of in the industry over the past few years, especially with the rise of kind of the Souls games, and I'm sure you have a lot of opinions on those. But yeah, it's a big question. What are your kind of overarching thoughts? Where do you want to start?
I mean, it is a big topic and it's a very controversial one as well. And I think these kind of questions always they're hard to come up with a definitive answer. It always boils down to like, well, it's sort of a case by case basis. And I think the most important thing to look at right now is like why games have certain difficulties. Like, is there a reason for them is integral to the experience the developers want to convey and have you play through it. And like also like what kind of reasons do people want easier modes? Like, I think there's in a broad sense, there's things like disability options, like a colorblind mode, and things for that people who have disabilities. Like, all games should have that where possible, right? Like,
Yeah,
those are
yeah,
just things that like what's the word they exclude
accessibility,
certain
right?
people. Yeah, exactly. Like I think like anything that can help include someone is generally a good thing. And so I think I kind of like edge on the side of like, when it's possible, it's good to have as many options as you can, and like to have more people be able to experience a game, that's only good. But I definitely see the argument from the other side and think at the same time, even if it's kind of contradictory to how I feel about, someone else having a different experience doesn't take away from my experience. So I kind of contradict myself and then saying that like I think some difficulties are integral to how the vision of the game, and I think to remove them or make it easier would kind of like
Mm-hmm.
change
It would
how
change
the
the
game.
experience, right?
Yeah, and I think that's sort of like I think the developer does have that ability to say like, "No, we want it played a certain way. This was our vision," and I think that's something that they're allowed to decide. And if that means that, you find a game is too difficult for you or you don't wanna play it, like, I think that's acceptable for them to say, "Well, then maybe this is an experience for you. Maybe you're better off, like, watching a Let's Play or engaging with it in some other way or just playing something else." Like, so I don't know. I feel kind of conflicted on both sides of it.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said, but I have I think there's a clear distinction to be made here of what we're talking about, because I I think there's a lot of not misconception, but a lot of confusion, and this is something Danny O'Dwyer talks a lot about. Kind of, he's the guy from NoClip.
Mhm.
I've watched a lot of what he had to say, and I really agree that with what he has to say, that difficulty is not the same as accessibility, and I think I
Mhm.
really want to make that clear.
Yeah.
Especially like you're talking about the accessibility options, colorblind modes, you know, any kind of thing to slow the game down so your reflexes don't have to be quite as skilled if you're someone that has some kind of impairment that prevents you from having, you know, that split second reflex, or whatever kind of disability someone may be living with. I think that we're totally right about putting as much accessibility as possible in every game, to make like text size, you know, augmentation, HUD augmentation, all these different things they're putting into games now. It's awesome. And to me, I kind of lose this argument a little bit because, in the sense that I don't think accessibility has anything to do with the difficulty of a game. Like this
Mhm.
question for listener mail is saying, you know, are despite should games be left the way developers created them, despite their lack of accessibility to less skilled gamers? Well, just because someone needs some accessibility options, in my view, doesn't mean they're a less skilled gamer. That's a different argument, than like being able to play because of, you know, let's just say color blindness as the example we'll use to have this argument. But to like, you know, do you know what you mean? That's the difference that
Mhm.
I kind of differentiate. And then difficulty to me is more so like how the game plays. And to me, if you're not good at a game, like I'm not good at the Souls games in general, right? If we want to use that as an example, I suck at Sekiro. I can't beat Lady Butterfly. I'm not someone that needs to use an accessibility option to play it, and I'm just a lesser skilled gamer at the game, and I can't beat it. And so I don't think there should be necessarily the same argument for someone who, like me, that doesn't use the accessibility options, as someone that does need to use them to in order to be able to play.
Yeah, I think it's a really good distinction to make, and I think unfortunately there's a lot of overlap, especially with certain things like you mentioned the reaction time maybe not being as quick. Like some of those things you can't really get around. Like it's going to be tied to the difficulty. Like like Souls is going to come up. Like I don't know how you make that a better experience for players that very fundamentally changing the gameplay. But I think that like definitely while there is that overlap, it still is a important distinction to make. Like, yeah, accessibility versus difficulty is not the same thing. And like there's like colorblind modes are like becoming so prevalent in games, and I think that's fantastic. Like it obviously doesn't change the difficulty of the game. It has nothing to do with how difficult it is, but it makes it, a lot more comfortable of an experience for people who need that option. And like
Hmm.
there was um there was a game recently too, and I wish I knew the name of it. I just saw it sort of like in a YouTube clip, and it was a game that had like spiders as an enemy,
Yes.
but
Oh,
it
I know
had
what
like
it is. That's that Xbox game on Game Pass where it's like the survival game, but you're shrunken down like Honey I Shrunk the Kids, and you're in the
yes,
garden. Whatever it's called. Oh man, it'll come to me. But go ahead.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's wonderful, and I don't know if I ever learned the name of it, but it was so beautiful that they'd made options to like adjust how the spiders looked for people who have like arachnophobia.
Hmm.
Um, and the funny thing about that is some of the spider options, like, 'cause, like, a lot of people who have trouble with that, it's the way they move, right? It's the way they skitter, or, like,
Yeah.
it's the eyes, like, there's some distinct part of a spider that bothers them. But some of the options, so you can take away its legs and its float, so you can take away its eyes, but, like, some of them are, like, almost scarier to me personally.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, I don't know, this, like, weird floating spider, like, "Oh, this is, like," and now it's a science horror creature.
It's grounded, by
But
the way.
yes, grounded, that's right. But yeah, I think stuff like that is wonderful. And I think like, I don't know what kind of person wouldn't agree that should just be an option. But I guess maybe we should get into specifically talking about difficulty as well.
Oh, definitely.
Uh,
Yeah. I just think it's an important distinction to make, because I feel
yeah.
like a lot of the discourse I see kind of online, and just, you know, whenever you go on forums and whatever people are saying, I think they just get those terms really conflated. And it's just not the same argument, really. You know, you can have one without the other to a certain extent, even though there is kind of that gray area where you kind of cross them over here and there. But
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, to me, difficulty is essential for certain games and it's not essential for others, and it's as simple as that in terms of like the strictly the design of the game. Like, for example, I feel like the argument kind of always gets brought back to action games like the Souls games, or, you know, stuff like more competitive kind of action focused titles, but no one ever really talks about difficulty in terms of like RPGs or puzzle games and stuff. And I don't even know if the argument kind of that's going on is really about difficulty as much as it is like difficulty in certain genres, which I think is an interesting point.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've kind of made myself two examples that maybe I'll go through quickly, and one fits into that RPG. It's obviously soul stuff. Like this is a lot of the where the it's not where it comes from, but has sparked a lot of discussion for
I think
people.
Sekiro
Like
was kind of the time when it became, one of the biggest kind of discussions surrounding like the game industry is like this difficulty thing. I feel it's existed for a while, but I think Sekiro back in 2018 was kind of where this really took off in terms of like becoming a
yeah,
huge thing.
exactly. I think so. I think this game, one game of the year. A lot of people wanted to check it out. Went into it, didn't have maybe some experience with some of FromSoft's older games, and like it was a lot harder than they anticipated. And we're like, well, fuck, I just bought this $80 game of the year, and like I can't play it. This is awful. Um, so yeah, we'll come back to that. And I think difficulty is there for a reason in a lot of games, and I think that it's sort of unfair to say that that that's something that can just be adjusted, or that it's easy to just like make some sliders go up and down, and it's easy now. But I think like it's integral to the game. Like Miyazaki, the FromSoft director, who's like the main guy on all these games, he's had a quote before because obviously like, he's been asked in interviews and whatnot, and he says that he doesn't want to change or add difficulty settings because he wants the player to feel accomplished, and that's a core part of how they design the games. Like he wants you to feel like you've come up against this insurmountable challenge, and it really does feel like that when you get to a really hard part of the level or a really tough boss in a lot of the Souls games and games in the similar genre, and it is like, oh, I don't. There's no I'm ever gonna beat this. It's so hard, and then you sort of like improve as a player, and it clicks, and you beat it, and it genuinely does feel like a wonderful sense of accomplishment. Um, so I think that would be diminished if the difficulty wasn't there, and then also.
Agreed. But
Mm,
maybe I'll make my point after you, I guess. But
okay.
yeah,
And also, I think it's subtle, but it does a lot for atmosphere. And Dark Souls in particular is like this. It's very bleak and oppressive, and you're kind of searching for hope and light in these really grim worlds, and you're 100% an underdog, and that is told to you kind of in the story and the lore and your character and who you are in the world, in your place in the world, but it's also reinforced by this gameplay of like it's so hard, and anything can kill you, and you're up against like the such a massive challenge, and you're fighting literal gods when you're just like a little human. And I think that, like, yeah, in one hand, I do understand, like, it sucks, like, some people wanna experience the story, or, like, maybe there's one particular boss that they're stuck on that, if they could skip and get through to the next area, be fine. But I think some of these games, they do put in, like, ways to help, like, you can summon someone to help if you're having trouble with the boss, and, like, they do kind of give you little bits and pieces here and there. And I don't know, like, it just seems like there would be a diminishing effect for how the
interesting.
feels if it wasn't so hard, like, it was a core idea and intentional part of the game's design. And I think, like, well, like, I don't know, I'm so conflicted, like, I want people to be able to enjoy it and to, like, have a good time, but at the same time, like, I don't think the developers are, like, villains for not adding it in. Like, I think it's kind of up to their discretion. It's like, at the end of the day, it's their art that they've created,
Yeah,
and,
yeah. Well, that's the thing, right?
it's up to you, right? So
Agreed, agreed. I don't know. I feel like I I feel like the more you were talking there, the more I actually disagree with a lot of what you had to say, and that's interesting because
hmm.
I feel like we're usually on the same page with a lot of stuff.
Okay,
Um,
interesting. Okay, maybe I'll give you my other example, and then you can tell me if you still agree or disagree. How's that?
sure, sure. How about that?
My other thing that I come up with, that I actually think is almost a better example, but it was maybe the less necessary one. Is I actually thought of the game Darkest Dungeon.
Yeah, that
Uh,
game. Yeah.
which is it's a relatively hard game. I think it's kind of more of like a decision making turn based RPG, but it's kind of centered on the core concept of like the psychological horror of exploring dungeons and fighting monsters and like the trauma your characters suffer. So
And, and then you go crazy in that game based on how long you're in the dark or something, right? As well.
Yeah, so basically what happens is it's kind of built around this tension of like a risk reward system of like how far you're willing to explore each dungeon to like level up
Yeah.
more, get more resources. But then you're also managing your character's sanity levels. And so like if you push too far in a dungeon or like don't have a good run, your characters end up with all sorts of like issues such as like they become paranoid or they become like hopeless and they have like all these negative like status conditions based on like what they've experienced in this like kind of like Lovecraftian dungeons you go through. And then so that's the main part of the game. And then the other half of the game is kind of like a little like city management sim. And you have to like, like let them pray or like do something to sort of like get their sanity back. And I think like that's kind of like what the game is about. Like that was their idea. So like if the game wasn't difficult, and it's not like incredibly hard, but it is hard. But I think like it would almost kind of trivialize the tension of the game if it was, if like the experience the developers want you to have is that like tension of the risk and reward. Like, is it, do I push on for a little bit more? Is that too greedy? Should I just leave the dungeon now, come back later with like a fresh party? Like, is it worth it or not? And that if the game was just too easy, like you wouldn't have that. And I feel like the game would lose a lot of like what actually makes it interesting because it's supposed to be a kind of like psychological aspect of it and like almost like you're humanizing these characters with what they're going through. But that only works if there's actual danger. So I
Yeah,
think like
yeah. I
I think in some cases the difficulty is justified and it's there for an intentional reason.
Yeah, I'm gonna start with what I have to say about it. I guess with the caveat that I agree that the difficulty is an intention of certain games. Like you're just like I'm not playing Donut County for a difficult time. I just wanted something easy to play.
Mhm.
When I play something that is more difficult, say Darkest Dungeon, or I like The Messenger, like I just spoke about a couple episodes ago. I like the challenge of that game, and part of the thing is the satisfaction you're talking about of like, wow, that was a hard boss. Like, thank God I beat him. I feel really good about myself. Like that. Yeah, totally understand. I think my viewpoint comes down to like as much as the artistic intention is there, and I guess it's not an expectation that there should be a bunch of you know difficulty settings and a bunch of extra work put into a ton of different menus and all this stuff. And I think people really have this fear of like, oh man, this is a really important game to me, I really like it this way, and it's gonna they have a fear it's gonna cheapen their experience if someone else gets a different one than them. But I don't know, the argument of like I can see it both ways, right? Because on one hand, sure, Miyazaki, the guy from Souls, is designing this experience that's supposed to be done a certain way, and it's supposed to be very difficult, and you can overcome it, and you feel good when you do it. And I totally get that feeling. But the thing is that not everyone has the same base skill level. And for someone like me, like I consider myself like pretty damn good at video games, right? Like I freaking do a podcast about them. I play a lot of games. Um, but I can't beat Lady Butterfly. I can't do it. And so what that's done for me is someone like me who doesn't want to either put the time or practice, or I just suck too much. I instead of getting that experience, I've now basically been unable to play the game. And it's not that I want to go through and have this easy time where I just touch the boss one time and he falls down and dies and I can't get hurt by anything and I'm just this invincible walking death machine. But I mean, having an ability to, hey, you've lost against Lady Butterfly 55 times. Maybe you want to turn on like, this slight regenerating health mod, or maybe you want to make her health down by 5%. Like maybe there's some kind of slider you could do.
Mhm.
And to me, like, I don't see the difference between putting the difficulty just the one single way that can't be changed, and or designing the game having that as the default thing and just putting a disclaimer at the start of the game saying something like, hey, we've crafted this experience and it's supposed to be designed this special way so that you get this wonderful experience the way we designed. However, for those of you that just seem to get stuck or need a little extra push, there is this menu you can go to if you want. And to me, like, that's such a small thing they can do to be inclusionary that doesn't really take anything away. Like, if you're some person that's really serious about being the best and being really good about souls and being really powerful and conquering this game, that's great. Like, you haven't lost anything just because other people can play it slightly differently than you. I just don't understand how people can view that as cheapening their own experience, I guess. And an example of this that I can think of is when, you know, Rockstar designs Grand Theft Auto. They're not designing that game. Their intention is not that you're going to go and steal 10 sports cars and run over hookers and just drive around until the police catch you. Like, maybe it is now
I
because
mean,
that's kind of what it's
now,
become, right?
maybe.
But
Yeah.
that wasn't what it was like in like Grand Theft Auto 2 and 3, like Vice City. Like you're supposed to go through and do the missions and do the side quests, and that's their intention. But people had more fun playing it a different way, and so like, why is that okay in a game just because we don't care about the difficulty of Grand Theft Auto?
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
know?
I you know, I'm kind of playing devil's advocate a little bit, but I 100% I do agree with you. I think what it comes down to is not like what's ideal, but just sort of like, you know, what's expected and what's realistic. I think like ideally, like, yeah, those options are just a good thing for certain people, right? Like, and I think you kind of hit the nail on the head with saying like the game should explain to you kind of what's intended, but here's an option if you'd still like to deviate. I think that's a
Hmm.
really good point in the sense that like it's kind of like the perfect counter argument for what I was saying. Like, you know, developers can still give you what's their intended experience. This is my vision for it, but just in case, here's a caveat to that. And so, you know, you don't have to worry about, you know, am I getting the right play style for me? Is this what I should be choosing? Like, am I playing the game right? Because, you know, you have a confidence that you are, or you know you're making that choice to change it. Like, I think the worst thing games do, and I hate it when I start a game and it's like, which at the very beginning, before you have any context, like which difficulty mode would you like? And it's like easy if you're a baby, normal, the normal mode, hard if you're like not a coward, and extra hard if like you're a super badass. And it's like that doesn't tell you anything. Like,
Yeah, yeah, right. And
I
what if
don't
you
know
only need
which.
the difficulty changed in a certain aspect of that game too, right? Yeah, there's so many different factors rather than just saying, oh, the game is harder now.
Yeah,
Like, in what way is it harder? How does it change when you change that
yeah,
difficulty slider?
exactly. Like it's so vague. It's not really helpful. So I, you know, like you just sort of end up picking normal a lot of the time, or just kind of defaulting to one position that you always take, and it's maybe not the best experience for you personally or for the game itself. But like, you know, you're kind of just locked into this arbitrary choice you've made based off of like oftentimes like a joking, not even that serious description. So
Yeah.
I think a key to making it sort of like make everybody feel happy and work for everyone is that like a clear distinction of like what exactly you're picking, what exactly like the game recommends, and then it's great. I think the only problem you get into now is like that's some resources it takes for the developers to do this, and like I don't know how much extra work it is or how like feasible it is. It doesn't seem like it's a huge thing, but I know a lot of like games kind of, you know, they get crunch time at the end and they're rushed for a lot of things, and like it does put extra pressure on the developer, extra money to work on the
Hmm.
game for longer and to create these extra settings. So it's like if they put it in, I see it only as a good thing, but I also think that if they don't put it in, like I don't think they should be villainized. Like some people get really extreme into the argument and like, you know, like kind of like oh, there's almost like that entitled sense of like, well, why didn't they put in an option for me? And it's like, well, it would be wonderful if they did. That would be absolutely lovely. But like, you know, like
Yeah, there's a point to which it's realistic and a point to which it's not, right? Like you can't take every
mhm.
single game and expect it's going to have 200 different difficulty sliders for specific different things. And I totally get that. It's not I mean there's always going to be, no matter if you were to have the best intention and put the most diverse difficulty settings ever, there still would be one person on the planet that does buy the game and there's some way that they're still unable to complete it for a difficulty reason. Again, not talking accessibility,
Oh,
just
I thought
difficulty, right?
I thought you were gonna say there's at least one person that will complain. It's like, of course,
Oh, no,
but
of
also
course.
also
Yeah.
yes to what you said, but also yes about people just complaining because they will no matter what.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't know. Like a good example for me too. I go back to sometimes with this discussion is Celeste. Right. I played Celeste a couple years ago
Yes.
on my Switch. Loved it. I loved Celeste. I had a great time. I managed to beat the campaign. I did not get all the collectibles. I couldn't be bothered to do that, but I completed the campaign and I did it on the normal difficulty. Do I feel less accomplished for beating that because some people turned off the fact that they don't get killed by the spikes? No, I don't, and I'm only happy for that because it probably, like you said, did it take more resources to put that feature in the game? Probably a few, right? Small team making the game, but then also how many more people have bought that game for like a little kid, for example, that's just getting into games and liked the way it looked, but didn't understand it's like a difficult experience. So they buy it for their kid, turn that mode on, and then they've sold another copy of the game to someone that wouldn't have otherwise played. So you can balance that side of the argument also, like, to a certain extent.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. And I think in an ideal world, it's good. And Celeste is one that kind of comes up a lot in this discussion. I haven't played it yet, but I know that it's known for having really good difficulty settings, like you said, like turning off very specific features like spike
Hmm.
traps, or like like having different health adjustments, or like having the game move a little bit slower, and like you can kind of toggle all those things, which is I think is
Yeah.
fantastic. And I think the game I played that I think is the best adjust approach to that with adjustable difficulty, which I think is the best way to do difficulty. Kind of having you let the players pick and choose what aspect to toggle.
Yeah, I totally agree
And
with that.
I really like the way that Supergiant does it. So
Yes.
it's in Hades as well, but it even goes back to their first game, to Bastion. And the way they do it is really clever because it isn't they do it almost like in a positive way. Instead of a negative, there's that negative connotation of like, well, I'm making the game easier. Like, ugh, like I don't want to do that. You know, and like it shouldn't matter, but some people have a little bit of an ego attached to it. But with Supergiant, what they do instead is they turn around and they say, hey, this is the base game, like sometimes it's kind of a tutorial section, or it's sort of an easy win. And then you get to a point and they say, hey, here's some features that you can turn on if you want, um, that make the game harder in a specific aspect, but will give you additional rewards. So it's awesome. Like you can do that in Hades after a certain point. And Bastion had it too, where you could. It was actually kind of ironically, it would be. I think it was like praying to different gods.
Yeah,
So
something like that, right?
that kind of that sort of made it through a few iterations of their games. But
Yeah,
you
yeah,
pray to certain gods, and it'll be like, oh, you get more XP, but enemies do like 20% more damage, or like
yeah,
you have your health reduced, but you do more damage. So there's various things you can pick and choose, and Pyre has that as well. And so they put that in all their games, and I think that's really nice because it puts the onus on the player to be like, I would like more difficulty. I'm getting a really good reward for it, or like what, I'm comfortable with how it is, and getting those extra rewards isn't really gonna matter much in the end.
yeah.
But it lets you kind of like tailor your experience to where you are skill wise, and also in terms of like like some games you play and I enjoy that it's challenging, right? Like I like with Hades earlier I was saying like I'm putting on these extra settings because I'm trying to push myself to see how far I can make it, and I want 100% it. But there's other games too, like in Pyre, for example. I never turned on any of these extra settings because I'm just sort of wanting to experience the story. The gameplay isn't a focus for me, with that one in particular. So I think those are the best approaches and the best settings, and letting
I think so
the player
too.
kind of like dictate how they wanna play. But again, it's sort of like it needs to fit the framework of the game. So there's so many variables that go into it.
Yeah, I think for the vast majority of games, there is an argument to be made that they could do stuff to put those type of difficulty settings in some way. And of course,
Mhm.
I mean, maybe to summarize like the conversation is like there are specific examples where the difficulty is part of the game and intrinsically tied, but I don't know. I feel like that is not the majority of games, and the ones that people pick out where it is tied to the difficulty are few and far between. Honestly, I don't know. Like I feel like that's a really Souls thing to do, to bang that drum one more time. It's like that's kind of the argument for those games, but and like other ones too. I guess like some other difficult. I'm trying to think of one on the top of my head here. I'm drawing a bit of a blank, but I
Honestly,
mean,
like, I think the most difficult games are games like platformers. Like, what I have trouble with the most is, like, I've been playing the, like, Crash Insane trilogy, and holy shit,
oh
that game
man.
is hard.
Well, those are old though. That's a whole different argument because they're tough
Yeah.
because games were made just tough as nails because they were short
But
and you had
exactly,
to
but I think
draw them out.
that's a good, like, example that I've just on the cuff thought of is I think the new one, Crash 4, is, like, you can turn off lives and just, like, get to go from the checkpoint, whereas, in the original Crash, you run out of lives, you have to start the level from, like, the very
Hmm,
beginning,
hmm.
which makes it so much harder, and it's like, well, now it just feels repetitive and frustrating, but then at
See,
the same time, like, I don't know, if you're a purist on that game, you're like, "Well, that's part of it." So,
yeah, but
like
that's just such a false way to make something harder, though, in my
Right?
opinion. Just because you can't execute it a certain number of times in a row, it doesn't make it harder. It just makes it more
Yeah.
tedious.
I agree. Anything that yeah,
Lives are
tedium is
bad,
not
folks.
good.
Don't make lives. If you're making
You
a game and if you're a game developer listening right now, just do not make a life system. Just give us some nice checkpoints,
Or if
okay?
you do, make it really creative and hide it so we don't even know it's lives.
Exactly. Or maybe make you so you can turn it on, just so if someone wants that option, they
Yeah.
can have it. But
I
I
think
don't.
I think our TLDR is toggles are fantastic. I have one other point, and it's kind of more of a joke point, but I think it's good too. Is that, like, we're talking a lot about difficulty modes in terms of like should there be an easy mode, and that's always kind of the focus is like easy mode, easy mode, easy mode. Games are too hard, but I think developers should also be like careful and smart about if they're making harder modes too. Like you got a lot of games that's like play on hard mode, and sometimes that's exciting, but a lot of the time you get those like really shitty hard modes that are just like it's the exact same game, but the enemies have like double the health bar, so they just soak up more
Yeah,
damage,
right,
but
right,
it
right.
doesn't change the gameplay in any meaningful way. So like I know
Exactly.
that's not what people think of a lot of time when they think about difficulty options, but I think it's also something kind of fun to point out. Like if you're gonna make a hard mode, like, make
Yeah,
it interesting or
that's actually a
rewarding
good
in some
point.
way.
That's a good point too. Like a lot of RPGs do that with New Game Plus, where it's like, hey, play through the story again, but you can use your character's full ability set from the start, and the enemies are harder and all that. So it's kind of cool. Yeah, I never really thought about difficulty in that way, but
Like those New Game Pluses systems are cool because like, "Oh, I've got this weapon I got late game, I wanna try it out," or like, "I'm gonna do a different build," or like yeah, like that kinda stuff is sorta neat. It's like replaying the game, but with a slightly different perspective, but then you get like, "Yeah, I played extra hard on, like, Borderlands, and this I'm using the exact same gun, but this guy just has, like,
yeah.
triple the health he used to
Oh,
have. He's no
Borderlands
new
was
moves."
yeah. That's an awful example, like, or a good example of an awful way to do it, where the enemies just become like
Mhm.
super strong, have different shields. I just had a really interesting difficulty thought as well, and I don't know if you know this about The Last of Us, but after beating it, I watched like a couple speed runs about it, and the speedrunners actually play that game on the difficult, the hardest setting, because what it does is it makes it so the enemies, instead of having I guess a certain amount of health allocated to their head or something, it makes it so like headshots are guaranteed one hit kills or something like that, so you can
Oh,
actually kill enemies quicker, even though you also die from a one from a headshot as well as the player. So if you know
oh,
what you're doing,
interesting.
you can actually go through the game faster, even though it's on a harder difficulty, because of
Huh.
the kind of the tweaks are there, even though you're at more risk of dying. So
Huh, that's interesting. I think
yeah,
that's cool. I think that's kinda common, and especially for games like the Bastion example where it's like, yeah, it makes it harder, but, like, you also get more rewards, but, like, if you're, like, incredible at the game enough to speed run, then, like, doesn't matter if you take more damage because 'cause you're not getting hit, so
yeah, yeah.
that's actually a really cool fact. I like
It
that.
is. It's a cool one. Anyways, I think we've had a really good discussion here. There's obviously so much more to unpack about difficulty and examples we could
Yeah.
bring in, and
This is
uh,
a black hole of a conversation. This is a donut county hole of a conversation.
it is. But I'm glad we've kind of planted our flag and cemented it out. I mean, at the end of the day, like the more people that can play games, obviously the better, because we'd love to
Mhm,
share the things we love with everyone that is interested.
mhm.
But I mean, there's some wiggle room and some caveats in there for sure. So in any case, Kate, I think that's going to do us for the episode today. So again, thank you everyone for listening and joining us for episode 23. And again, you send us your thoughts on the PlayStation Plus games for February. We'll be doing a big blowout on those games on February 22nd on episode 24 of the show. And coming up on episode 25, just to give you a little teaser, for the celebration of the quarter, I guess we're quarter way to 100 episodes by episode 25, obviously, doing the math. So we thought
Yeah.
we'd celebrate by doing a combined top 25 games of all time list, where we'll have to maybe sort out which games are on the list, which ones make it, which ones don't, on a combined list. So maybe a bit of arguments going on there. We'll see. We'll see. It's a couple episodes away, but I'm really looking forward to that. Um, I know you are
I
too.
know.
So
I've already been stressing about it in a good way, in a wonderful and good way.
well, we got to episode 24 to do before that. So like I said, join us again on February 22nd for the PlayStation Plus blowout, and we will see you then. Thanks for listening. The intro and outro music for Circles and Squares was produced by friend of the show, Matthew Chan. Interlude music is from Scott Gratton of the Free Music Archive. Our channel art was created by @unreasonable on Twitter, and our brother Alex is the designer of the Circles and Squares logo. Thank you all for listening and supporting the show.